everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yay! Thank you so much for coming. I'm genuinely touched and moved. I'm wearing a microphone for this. I don't have a regular microphone. I will talk really loud. Is that better?
Yes.
I am talking about a subject that I am passionate about, so it will be easy for me to speak loudly. But if you have problems hearing me as I go on, please let me know. There's also a chair up in the front if you want to really be able to hear me, or room on the tables. Okay, so thank you all for coming on a Saturday morning when there's lots of other things to do. My name is Stacy Schmeidel. I'm your presenter for today. I think I know most of you, but for those of you who I don't know, thank you for being here. I had an incredible opportunity this summer, a once in a lifetime opportunity to spend 6 weeks at Katmai National Park. Sorry, feeling emotional about it, because it meant a lot to me. To spend 6 weeks at Katmai National Park volunteering for the Park Service and living with bears. And this was an incredible gift that was given to me by Smith College. Thank you very much for letting me use my vacation time. By the National Park Service, thank you for hiring me. And just by the universe for having everything to come together in this remarkable way. This is a place that people wait all of their lives to visit, and I had an opportunity to be there for 6 weeks. So I feel like it is my obligation to pay back that gift by sharing my experience with as many people as possible. So that's what I want to do today. This is the first of several talks that I'm giving on this subject. Every one of them is going to be quite different. You guys are my first group, so thank you for being my guinea pigs. There's stuff that's going to go wrong today, especially around technology. I thank you in advance for your patience. Let's start this the way that we would start a hike. How many people are here from the Wilbraham Hiking Club? Yay! How many people are here because you're someone who I know as a friend or from work or both? Excellent. How many people are here because you are bear cam viewers? These people I have never met in real life. And I'm so touched that you guys made the trip. So that's why you're all wearing name tags, so you can meet each other and get to know each other. I want to start with some housekeeping first, just to get it out of the way. I'm going to send around, well, first of all, one housekeeping announcement. I am trying to record this talk. I'm not sure it's going to work, but if there is anybody who doesn't want to be on camera, go to the back of the room. Because if you're up here, you might wind up on camera, if this works. Thank you to everybody for crowdsourcing the technology first thing in the morning. If it does work, it's because of you. Some housekeeping details. This talk will not have time to go over everything that I want to cover. And I'm sure that there are people here who are going to have questions that I won't answer. So if I don't get to answer your questions, a lot of you know me and have my email address and or my cell phone number. But if you are a bear cam viewer who I've never met, take one of these cards that I'm going to pass around. This has my email address on the back. So this will help you stay in touch afterwards. So if you could just send that around. And I'm also going to send around a sign-up sheet for a mailing list. I'm not going to spam you with mail, but my hope is that after today's talk, you will all want to be watching the bear cams. And if you're not already watching the bear cams, and if you want to get a reminder next June when the bears come out of hibernation and they start fishing, put your name here and I will ping you in June once the bears come back. Oh, I forgot a pen. Thank you to Jen for contributing a pen. Finally, the most important thing, lunch, because it's all about the lunch. Many of you have brought a lunch, and if it's nice afterwards, we can sit out on the lawn and enjoy lunch together. If it's cold and or rainy, we'll go over to the Smith Campus Center and eat our lunches there. Everybody's welcome to join us, or you may want to break into smaller groups and go downtown for lunch. That's totally fine too. If at any point during today's hike/presentation, if you need to stop to catch your breath, get a drink of water, make a comfort stop, there's a bathroom right outside at the bottom of the stairs on the right. Feel free to come and go as you need to. My intention is to talk for maybe 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, and then leave lots of time for questions, because I think that that's the best way to get the information you all need. People at the back, is my voice getting softer, or are you still okay? Okay, good. Let's get started. I want to start with a question. This is interactive. There's no right answers. I'm not going to start with a question. Here's what I'm going to try to do during today's talk. I want to talk, because most of you are people who I know, because you're a friendly crowd, there's lots of places to start this talk. But for today, I'm going to start with how I discovered the bears. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about Katmai National Park and Preserve and why it's so special. Then I'm going to talk a fair amount about my experience volunteering at Katmai, because I think that's why most of you are here. Then at the end of the talk, I want to introduce you to some of the bears. Oh, you laugh, but I'm serious. And then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. And again, come and go as you need to. Do what you need to do. And now I'll start with a question. What do you think about when I ask you to imagine a bear?
Big.
Big.
Claws.
Claws? Big claws.
With cubs.
Oh, cubs.
Wild.
Wild.
White, brown, or black.
Ooh, white, brown, or black. We're talking about brown bears today. Just so you know, Devin, sorry. We're not doing polar bears.
Woolly.
Woolly. Good.
40 miles an hour.
Say again?
40 miles an hour.
40 miles an hour. Most of you don't know that. Bears, for short periods of time, can move up to 40 miles an hour. Now let me ask a different question. What do you feel when I ask you to imagine a bear?
Well, now I'm scared.
Scared? What else? Intimidated?
Respect.
Respect.
Strong.
Strong, yeah? These are great answers. I asked this question at trivia the other night, and we had a range of opinions like this, and hey Eileen, come on in. There's room on the table up front. People talked about fear, big bears and fear, and they talked about cute cubs and love and wanting to give them a hug. So there are, I think, a range of emotions and a range of opinions and a range of thoughts about bears. And what I want to suggest to you after 6 weeks in Katmai and 5 years on Bear Camp is that maybe all of those thoughts and all of those emotions are accurate, and maybe they're all kind of inaccurate too. And I love this quote that says, people can live with real bears. People can live with real bears. It's the bears roaming the wilds of the human imagination that are impossible to get along with. I need to say, this photo reminds me, I took 0 pictures when I was in Katmai, you guys. I'm really sorry. I plugged my camera in the last week. I got nothing that was usable. There are millions of beautiful photos of Katmai, and none of them are mine. Most of the photos in this talk, including this one, were taken by Maurice Whalen, who was also a volunteer with me. Some of them are from Wikimedia Commons. But if you like the photos, don't thank me, thank Mo. So, the story begins, for the purposes of this talk, with 28 letters that changed my life. explore.org/livecam/brown bears. I will make these slides available to anybody who wants them afterwards, so you don't need to write this down. It's also on the back of that thing that I'm sending around. I'm somebody who I have never thought about bears. I did not grow up going to national parks. I had been to one national park before 2013, and that was kind of an accident. I went there to hike. But I had never really thought about national parks, and I had never really thought about brown bears. And then in 2013, a friend of mine sent me this URL. And I logged in. Exactly. There were gasps of audible surprise from the audience, because I logged in and I saw something that looks like this. I saw a live video stream, not just a photo, but a live video stream of dozens of bears gathered at a waterfall trying to catch fish. And this was July. And so they were trying to catch fish, but they were also mating. And they were fighting and trying to establish dominance. And they were showing their cubs around, because that's what bears do at Katmai National Park in July. And I'm going to try to show a video, which may be the last video I try to show. On my first day watching, I saw this. Here's our waterfall. And here's a mom with 3 cubs. And you can't see it, but there's lots of bears. Oh, there they are. All those big male bears gathered at the waterfall. And here's the mom up at the top of the waterfall. And there's her cubs sitting on those rocks. And that mom's trying to catch a fish on the top of the waterfall, while all those big bears stand underneath. And then, whoa. Let's see it again in slow motion. 2 of her 3 cubs were caught up in the water, and they fell over the waterfall. The bear that had been fishing just below saw the cubs and went toward them, and the mom runs down to protect her cubs from that bear. And then they all climb out of the water, and they shake themselves off. She yells at them. And they live happily ever after. Yes? Male bears sometimes do eat cubs, and we'll talk about that later. That's always a risk. So something that's really important to know, something that I came to know as I watched these cams, is that every time so these bears gather at the waterfall in Katmai National Park, and sorry.
Can I ask something? I'm a total novice. These are brown bears. They're not grizzlies?
These are not. This is a great question. So, present. I'm not showing any more videos. Okay, there are 2 things that have just come up. These are brown bears. These are coastal brown bears at Katmai National Park. These are with the bears of Kodiak Island. I think that these are the biggest brown bears in the world. Brown bears are slightly smaller than polar bears, but they're bigger than black bears. So these bears are bigger than the ones that we see normally. Are they brown bears or are they grizzly bears? My understanding is that a distinction is rather arbitrary. I believe that grizzly has a slightly different personality than these bears. These are, I'm going to say, coastal brown bears. So these are really big brown bears that live in Alaska. There are no black bears in that area. There are no polar bears in this area. These are just really big brown bears.
Are they known as Kodiak bears?
They're not. My understanding is that the bears of Kodiak Island are known as Kodiak bears, but that these are just brown bears. So I saw the bears fishing. I saw the bears mating. I saw those cubs go over the waterfall. How could you stop watching? I couldn't. And the good news is that if you're in Alaska in July, there's 24 hours of daylight, and these cams are live almost 24 hours a day. The cams are remarkable. They're a project of an organization called Explore.org, which is the world's largest network of nature webcams. This Explore.org is a philanthropic organization that was started by Charlie Annenberg. Come on in, there's seating up front on the table if you want to perch. So Explore.org was started by Charlie Annenberg as a philanthropic organization, and he has put webcams in various locations around the world. You can watch bison grazing in Canada. You can watch elephants in Kenya. But the crown jewel of these webcams is BearCam. And on an average day, I came to learn there are about 1,500 people, 2,000 people watching these bears. When they broadcast, sometimes what they'll do is they'll take the broadcast and they'll put it on Facebook Live. And I have seen those broadcasts reach as many as 10,000 people. The cams are operated by volunteer camera operators all over the world who follow the action and move the cam to follow something interesting that's happening. So that's how I found the cams. Important to say that the Katmai webcams are special. They're special for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that they're special is that they really are a partnership between Explore.org and Katmai National Park. Anybody recognize these people? Yes. So what I came to learn as I started watching the cams is that it's not just a passive viewing experience. You can simply sit there and watch bears catch fish, but they have rangers like Ranger Roy and Ranger Mike, my personal hero, who will do talks on the cams, and they'll come in and talk for an hour about bear dominance, or they'll come in and talk for an hour about hibernation, or they'll do what's called a play-by-play, where they'll stand on the platform and narrate the action as if it was a football game and tell you what you're watching. There's nothing I would rather do with my time. So the Explore.org webcams, and BearCam in particular, it's not just a passive viewing experience, it's an opportunity for all of us to really be students of the bears and to learn about the bears. Anything that I get right about bears in this talk today, anything that I got right talking to people during my volunteer experience is because of what I learned on the cams. I had never thought about bears before I started watching the cams. But I listened to Ranger Mike talk about the cams, I read the comments that they were posting in chat, and I became passionate about bears. Let me tell you a little bit about Katmai. Katmai is located on the Alaska Peninsula. It's 300 miles southwest of Anchorage. So here's Anchorage, here's Katmai. To get to Katmai National Park, you fly to Anchorage, and then you fly to a place called King Salmon, which is a very small town with an airport. There are no roads into Katmai National Park. If you have a boat, you can boat from King Salmon to Katmai.
So these are all pontoon planes?
They're float planes. So you would take off, and I did not have a float plane experience. If you go to Katmai as a guest, as a visitor, you'll leave probably from King Salmon, you'll get into a plane, and that plane will land on Naknek Lake right in the middle of Katmai National Park. I took a boat. I'll tell you about that in a minute. An important thing to know about Katmai National Park is that it is located here on the Alaska Peninsula. Here's Kodiak Island. Here's the Pacific Ocean. Here's Bristol Bay. Has anybody heard of Bristol Bay? Why is Bristol Bay important? Salmon. Bristol Bay is one of the world's most important fishing locations, and it is the source of the world's largest salmon run. And in July, so here's Bristol Bay, what happened this July is that a record 6.2 million salmon began their journey from Bristol Bay and started migrating upstream. There's 6.2 million salmon here in Bristol Bay. 2.1 million of those salmon started migrating upstream in the Naknek River towards Naknek Lake and Katmai National Park. Here's a Katmai National Park, 4.2 million acres, huge, 4.2 million acres. I spent 6 weeks in a part of the park that was about 2 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. And that's a part of the park called Brooks Camp. So when I talk about being at Katmai, what I'm really talking about is being at Brooks Camp. Brooks Camp is a very small section of the park. And the reason Brooks Camp is important is because of Brooks River. So Brooks Camp was set up right around, built around Brooks River. And there's a lodge. Brooks Lodge is right here, over on this side. There's a campground up there. And then over on this side of the river, there are 3 viewing platforms where people stand to watch the bears. So if you come visit, you'll get in a plane, you'll land at Naknek Lake, you'll get out of your plane, you'll see bears. You'll go to bear orientation up here at the visitor center, more on that in a minute. And then you'll walk over here to these 3 viewing platforms where you can stand and watch bears. The reason that the national park, or the reason that Brooks Camp was built here, the reason that this part of the park matters is because of that river. That river from Naknek Lake up here to Brooks Lake is only 1.5 miles long. We're not talking about a lot of land. But right in the middle of that river is the waterfall. And so what happens is you've got those 2.1 million salmon who have swum up the Naknek River. Of those 2.1 million, 400,000 or 500,000 salmon are going to swim up the Brooks River in the month of July. Imagine it. There are times where the river, all you can see is salmon. So those salmon are swimming upriver, and they go 0.6 miles, and they encounter that waterfall. Remember the waterfall where the mamba bear was fishing? So they encountered this Brooks Falls. And the salmon get bunched up because they're trying to jump that falls and get back to their spawning ground. But this falls is, I don't know, 6 feet high, 8 feet high, something like that. They're swimming upstream. They're going that way. They're starting down here. So Naknek Lake is down here, and they're going to swim upstream, and they're going to try to go here. And you will see them when you watch the cams leaping over the waterfalls. They look like popcorn. We would do, one of the things that we did as rangers was every half hour we would do a salmon count. So what we did is we would count the number of people on the platforms, we would count the number of bears, and then we would count the number of we'd count the number of salmon trying to leap Brooks Falls. And you would look at your watch and you'd set a timer for 60 seconds and count how many salmon you saw trying to go over. On most days that I was there, I would see between 120 and 240 salmon.
In a minute?
In a minute. My counts were low. Other people, when I would count 240, people would count 300. So it's not an exact science, but that gives you a sense of what's happening. And you have all these fish trying to jump over the falls. If you're a bear, Jamie.
How often would they make it on a jump?
So Jamie asked a really good question, and I would like to take this opportunity to apologize for anybody who heard me answer this question incorrectly on the platform. When people asked me on the platform what their success rate was, I told them it was an incredibly high number. I have since learned that the success rate is approximately 6%.
Oh my God.
Ranger Mike Fitz, who I pointed out earlier, has done a study, and I believe that the number that he has quoted is 6%. But if you're a salmon, that's your mission. That's your mission in life, is to get back to the place that you were born so that you can spawn and die. If you're a bear, that is not your mission. So the bears are aware that this is a place where a lot of salmon come and where a lot of salmon get stuck trying to go over the falls. So so what is a barrier for the fish is an opportunity for the bears, which is why they gather in such large numbers in July at the waterfall to try to catch fish. Here, yes?
What's the percentage of fish caught just not jumping over the falls from the bears hanging out on the bottom? So it looks like there's many more on the bottom than on the fall.
So that's an excellent question. And this is something that I don't get into a lot in this talk, but I'll cover a lot in my November 13th talk. But I'll touch on it here. Something to know is that, okay, so I'm going to back up to this point. What's happening is that in July, the salmon are migrating upstream. And the bears will gather here at the waterfall to catch the salmon, try to catch the salmon as they're migrating upstream. What you can't see in anything that I'm showing you today, sorry, my time was limited, is that remember this waterfall is 0.6 miles up the river. So there's 0.6 miles of river down here that you're not going to see today. The big male bears will gather here at the waterfall in July. There's a middle section of the river called the riffles, which is where smaller bears will gather. It's an easier place to fish, and they don't have to deal with fighting with the big guys. And then in the lower river near the lake, that's where the moms and cubs will try to fish. Terry's good question is, what's the percentage of salmon that are caught or that make it in other places? To be honest, I don't know. I know that I believe I know that 6% of the fish that jump the falls make it. But I honestly don't know about the rest of the river. It's a great question. What I do know is that this is an extraordinarily rich food source for these bears. What we see on the cams in many ways is atypical, because to have this many bears gathering, they come here because it's a really, really, really good source of food. There are similar places in other areas, but this one is really good. So kind of get to it? Jim.
Does that mean that it was kind of unusual for that mother and the cubs to be at the falls because mostly it's the big one?
So that's a really good question. The question is, was it unusual for that mom to be at the falls? What I would say is this: there are a lot of moms who won't bring their cubs to the falls. If you're a bear, your entire life is measuring risk against reward. And I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to do it this way. Bears are solitary creatures. Here's an important thing to know about bears. Bears are solitary creatures. They don't want anything to do with other bears. They don't want anything to do with people. They just want to, they have one job in life, which is to get fat. And it's easier to do that if there aren't a lot of other bears around. But if you have this food source, if you've got 240 salmon jumping that waterfall every minute, you're going to think, yeah, I might risk it. I'm really hungry. So these bears have come out of the den in May. They've been sleeping from November to May. They're super hungry. They've come out of the den in May. It's now late June, maybe early July. They've been subsisting on sedge grass. So they need food. Suddenly the salmon show up at Brooks Falls. They know that's where the salmon are. So they're constantly making this mental calculus. Where can I go to get salmon? Where am I going to be safe? And in making the decision to go to Brooks Falls versus the lower river, a mom who is super hungry might take she might risk taking her cubs there. There was a mother bear who took her cubs up near the falls this July, and one of those cubs was killed by a bigger bear. The cub just got caught in the middle of a fight. But the real point is that a bear's entire existence is figuring out risk versus reward. I need a salmon. I need some berries. Who's that bear over there? Do I recognize that bear? That bear smells familiar. Is that bear more dominant than me? How close can I get to that? Is that a bear that will tolerate me versus a bear that's gonna pick on me? Is that a bear that I can get close to? How close? I know this bear from last year. How close can I get to that bear without having him be mad? Or that bear was more dominant than me last year, but I'm a lot bigger this year, so I'm going to try to make a move and show that bear that I'm more dominant. So, and this is a point that I wanted to make because I tried to find a video that shows why the bear cams are fascinating, and it's really hard because honestly, when you're watching the bear cams, most of the time it's like life. Most of the time you're watching, your life just goes on and nothing happens. And you're there and you're doing your job and nothing happens. And you put gas in the car and you go to the grocery store and nothing happens. And and this is how most of us live, right? And so to try to show you all in 5 minutes why some of us spend 14 hours a day watching the bear cams, it's really hard. But the more you watch, the more you learn. And sometimes things happen. So this bear, who's 409 bead nose, she's standing there, she's trying to do her job. Something's going on. You can see her, she's kind of looking around. So and so your crazy neighbor comes. And he parks where he's not supposed to park. And he starts throwing beer cans on your lawn. And that's why we watch the cams. Because bears just go about living. These cams give you an opportunity to watch bears living their daily lives where nothing really happens. And then suddenly, something happens. She caught a fish. And when you put bears together, so that was watching 2 bears in proximity. Imagine watching 20 bears in proximity, or 30 bears in proximity. There was one night in July where there were 30 bears visible from the Brooks Falls platform. And to watch those bears interact with each other, to watch those bears catch fish and mate, but also sort out the hierarchy, that is fascinating. So now I have to do something awkward with the slides so that I can show one more video. Sorry.
So there are a bunch of people standing on a platform and the bears don't mind it?
So that's a great question. The question is, there's a bunch of people standing on the platform, why don't the bears mind? I'm going to answer the question this way, and this is my personal answer. I don't know if like a ranger would answer the question the same way. The bears who fish at Brooks Camp, well, I'm going to say a couple, I'll step back first. The Brooks Camp, Katmai National Park works really hard to let people get close to bears in the wild, to let you see bears being bears. The way that they do that is, they do that by 2 ways. One, basically they have, they're going to teach us to behave predictably. So for example, you're supposed to hike in groups. You don't carry food with you because they don't want the bears to associate people with food. And you're going to watch the bears standing on a platform, standing on one of those 3 platforms that I talked about earlier. The bears, I think that the bears who fish at Brooks Camp, oh, I should say, those platforms are open from the falls platform, which is where these waterfalls videos are taken, is open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. They do close that platform from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. so that bears who don't like being around people have an opportunity to fish. To one degree or another, I believe that the bears who fish at the falls platform are comfortable being around people. And they're comfortable being around people who are standing in a group of 40 on an elevated platform with a camera, not eating food. I believe strongly that changes in that behavior are going to throw the bears off, right? So I would always tell people, if you're eating a granola bar or a Snickers bar up there on the platform, the bears are going to notice that. There's a long walkway that you go down to get to the platform. And we train people to keep walking on the walkway and stop when you get to the platform. I really pushed people to keep walking because I believe that the bears would go under those walkways to eat and to mate and to sleep. And I don't think that the bears were as used to seeing the people stopping on the walkways as they were on the platforms. So I also suspect that there's some bears who probably don't fish at Brooks Falls because they don't like being around people. There's a lot of people in Brooks Camp, and if you're a bear who doesn't like people, you're not going to like Brooks Camp. There's also, I will show you a video about a bear who doesn't like being around people. Some bears are more comfortable with people than others. Mother bears, for example, will often leave their cubs, some mother bears will leave their cubs near the platform because they know that big male bears won't go near the viewing platform. So the mother bear says, that's a good place to park the cubs because male bears aren't going to go there. Let me show this. Here's Otis. So here you have 4 bears over in the office fishing. This shows what happens sometimes when bears get close to each other. Bears don't like being close to each other. 755 Scaredy Bear has caught a fish. He's going to take it over here and eat. Otis doesn't like that. So Otis is grumbling. So what happened there was that 755 Scaredy Bear caught a fish, and Scaredy Bear doesn't like, Scaredy Bear is like his name. He doesn't like being around other bears. So Scaredy Bear was going to go over here and eat the fish. Otis didn't like Otis, who is a lover, not a fighter, didn't like Scaredy Bear walking so close to him, so he bit him. Scaredy Bear dropped the fish, and then Walker, 151 Walker, came in and bit him as well. It was a bad day for Scaredy Bear. So these are the kinds of things that you see when you watch the bear cam. Oh, not a coyote.
Wolf. No?
And then you get surprises like this, sometimes. We have bears fishing. That's a wolf. And these are salmon scraps lying on the base of the river.
I want to ask you about salmon scraps.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think about the animals that come to my garden and they just take a hunk out of it. So are you just completely littered with, they took the fillet and left the scrap, and then you've got this whole other opportunistic, eating element?
So Devin's good question. So yes. The place is littered with salmon.
Thousands of them. I mean, they're...
Yeah. So what happens is that you have these big bears, you have the big male bears who gather at the base of the waterfall. When the salmon season first starts in late June, those bears are going to gobble up the salmon quickly. What happens is, as the season goes on, they start hydrating. And what you'll see them do is they'll bite the head off the salmon, they'll peel the skin off the salmon, and they'll eat the roe. They go for the fattiest parts of the fish. And then they just kind of start tossing the fish aside. So what happens is that, and you saw a little bit of this in that video clip with the wolf, is that the smaller bears will kind of array themselves downriver so that they can catch the salmon scraps that come floating down the river. Other animals, occasionally a wolf, last year there was a wolf who showed up every morning when the cams first came on, and I think she would go down to the river and catch and pick up a salmon scrap and then take it up the hill. So it is the case that when I was there in July, there were a lot of salmon parts lying around, because the bears by mid-July aren't eating all the fish, they're hydrating. But it is also the case that those salmon parts did not stay on the ground very long. If you're a young bear, if you're a 2.5-year-old bear that's just been emancipated by your mom, your fishing skills aren't that great. So, a scrap of fish that's been rejected by a big bear, that big bear's trash is your treasure. That's lunch. Yep. So, I've tried to give you a sense of how fascinating this is. The only way to really understand how fascinating it is to watch the bear cams. And I hope you will all become at least partial bear cam viewers. If you really fall in love with the bears, you will want to visit Brooks Camp. Let me talk a little bit about doing that. I've already said that Katmai National Park, Brooks Camp is a very hard place to get to. There are no roads, you can't just drive in. There are no use limits. Theoretically, any number of people per day could visit the park. However, if you want to spend overnight at the park, and you probably would want to, you have two options. You have three options. You can volunteer for the National Park Service, or you could go as a guest and stay in Brooks Lodge, which is really a series of cabins that houses 40 people per night. Or you could stay in the campground, which houses 60 people per night. Brooks Lodge has a lottery. The lottery for 2020 will start in January of 2019. And it goes like that. And the campground for July usually fills up in January the year before. There are cancellations that come up at the lodge. Do not despair if you don't get a place in the lottery. You may get a cancellation. But my point is that there's room at Katmai, there's room at Brooks Camp for 100 guests overnight. There were, however, about 400 guests in the park per day in July. And that's because you can go in as a day trip. And what that means is getting in a plane and flying in from King Salmon or elsewhere. landing on the lake. If you go in for a day trip, be aware, there's weather. If there's weather anywhere between you and Brooks Camp, your flight's going to be delayed. So one of the things that I want people to take away from this is spend time in Katmai. Because if you think you can go and see the wonders of this place in 2 hours, you won't be able to. We've talked already about the viewing. Oh, here's a good view of the viewing platforms. This is how the viewing platforms look to the bears. These are wooden platforms. They're about that high off the ground. Theoretically, yeah, they could. Theoretically, they could. There's a nice rope at the bottom. But remember, bears are solitary creatures. Unless you're grilling hot dogs up there, they don't want to have anything to do with you. So it's not uncommon for you. You'll see bears play fighting right down here at the base of the lower river platform, or you'll see bears eating fish right below the platform. It is the case that you will likely encounter bears before you get to the platform. So one of the ways that Katmai manages its wildlife viewing is by teaching people to behave predictably and by having them stand in the viewing platforms. But you will probably see bears when your plane lands on the beach.
That's so Alaska, there's no airstrip there.
Exactly. Oh no, you're landing in the water and then going up to the beach.
With no pontoons.
This photo on the left was taken from inside the visitor center. So you're probably going to encounter bears when you land on the lake. There's a reasonable chance that when you're in the visitor center for your mandatory bear orientation, there's a reasonable chance that a bear or two will run past. And there's a very good chance that as you're walking to the viewing platform, you will encounter a bear. Terry.
How many incidents are there between bears and humans?
The last human-bear encounter was, the last time somebody was hurt was, I think, in the 1970s.
Oh, really?
There is a trail. So to get to the falls platform, which is the platform right by the waterfall, you need to walk up a 0.6 mile long trail that's in the woods. And what happened in the 70s was that there was a family walking up that trail, and a bear came along. They were not there was I think it was a mom and a dad and a small child, 7-year-old child, and a bear. They were walking up the trail, and a bear came along. It was being chased by another bear, and brushed up against the child, who fell over. There were 2 incidences this summer when I was there of a bear touching a guest. What had happened was that there was a small subadult bear who had recently been dominated by a bigger bear, and so the subadult, I think, maybe wanted to show that, hey, I got some too. So that bear went up to a person and touched the person's leg, and a ranger intervened. But the ranger was banging her cup on the thing, and then eventually in that case the ranger had to use bear spray. But those incidences are few and far between. As a volunteer, I was issued bear spray. Rangers and volunteers carry bear spray. I never used it.
Pepper spray?
Yeah, it's bear spray. I think it's a heightened dose of pepper spray. I mean, it is pepper spray. It is the single most effective way of deterring bears. Way better. I had a conversation with a guest who said, well, what about guns? What about arrows? What about nunchucks? Bear spray. Bear spray is your best bet. And so if you're hiking in bear country, I would say carry bear spray. Most people who visit Brooks Camp do not carry bear spray, but what they do is they go to bear school. So let me talk quickly about bear school. You get off your plane, you're greeted by a friendly ranger or a volunteer who says, hey, come to the visitor center, come to bear school. And what you're going to learn at bear school is don't carry food with you. Don't leave your pack lying around, because a pack is a really good toy to a bear. And keep a distance. At Brooks Camp, you keep a distance of 50 yards from bears. You hike in groups because, and you talk, because conversation and smell, human smell, that is enough to keep most bears well away from you. If you're walking by yourself, as sometimes I had to do, I would sing because the bears wanted nothing to do with my singing. There are cases where you will have a closer encounter. You will encounter a bear closer than 50 yards. What you're taught in bear school is, you're at Brooks Camp. What you're taught in bear school is, I'm here. A bear pops up in the woods. A bear pops up on the trail. The bears are creatures of habit, and they're going to want to take the trail for the same reason we take the trail. It's easier. So if I'm walking down the trail and I see a bear coming towards me, I back up. Usually, sorry?
Facing the bear.
Facing the bear, keeping the eye on the bear. And I keep talking to if you're in a group, you get together. Interestingly, if you're in a group and you see a bear, everybody's instinct is to scatter, which is not the right thing to do. What you want to do is get big. You want to gather your group together so that you have a bigger mass than that bear. And then you back up. And if the bear keeps coming, you yield at Brooks Camp, you yield the trail. That trail belongs to the bear. And so I'll tell you about an experience that I had. I'd had a really long day. This was late July. And I was leaving work, and it was about 7:15, and I was leaving the falls platform and walking down the trail, and I saw a bear coming towards me. And I thought, oh, darn it, because it was just not a day that I wanted to encounter the bear. And I backed up, and I kept singing my Beatles classics, because that's what I would sing. In the land where I was born. And the bear kept coming. So what you do then is you get off the trail, and you yield the trail to the bear. So I backed into the woods, and I was able to get about 8 feet. And I'd been taught by my roommate who worked in bear management, you don't want to get so far into the woods. So there's a mental calculus that goes on with this, right? Because you need to get away from the bear on the trail, but you don't want to encounter another bear, and you don't want to sprain an ankle tripping over a rock. So I was able to back up about 8 feet, and I stood in the woods singing my song, and that bear walked past me on the trail, in the land where I was born, and he walked past slowly, because this bear was not moving 40 miles an hour. And he looked at me. So he walked past, and he kind of looked at me out of the corner of his eye. And I looked at him, and I kind of did that, but kept looking at him and kept singing. And he went right on past. And it was, I felt, kind of a moment of grace. And it was also the way that things should be, right? Because he was going to fish. He was going up to the river to catch a fish. And I was trying to go home. And he wanted nothing to do with it. I'm not of interest to him. His job is to get fat. And so those fish in the river were a lot more interesting to him than I was.
Stacey, are they sensitive enough to react to your visual cue, like you look away?
I don't know. To be honest, so Devin's question was, do you need to avert your eyes? I've heard mixed things about that. For me, that was instinct. I wanted to keep an eye on him, but I didn't want him to feel threatened. So that was instinct more than anything else. This is going really long, and we're just getting to the part about volunteering, so I'm going to try to move through this really quickly. So here's what I want to say. If you're interested in volunteering at Katmai National Park, by all means go for it. I am 56 years old. There are volunteers there who are younger than me, and there were volunteers there who were older than me. These jobs are posted on volunteer.gov. All national park volunteer jobs are posted on volunteer.gov. And if you care about our national parks, by all means go check out volunteer.gov. I found a job before I went to Katmai captioning videos for Yosemite National Park. And I did that over winter break last year, just writing up captions for videos. I found a volunteer position last month, working at the Big E, representing the National Park Service on volunteer.gov. There are opportunities to volunteer for 6 weeks in Bush, Alaska, like I did. There's also opportunities to volunteer at the Big E for 2 hours. There's opportunities to do a river cleanup at a national park. If you believe in our national parks, volunteer for our National Park Service. My job as a volunteer was talking to people about bears. I did that for 40 hours a week. You work an assigned shift. You work an assigned shift, 40 hours a week, alternating indoor days and outdoor days. So one day I would work in the visitor center. Part of that was retail, ringing up sales. A lot of it was greeting people who had just landed, getting them into the bear orientation that the ranger would provide. The outdoor days, what you're doing is you're standing on the Brooks Falls platform talking to people about bears. And different people do that differently. Some people would kind of talk in a loud voice so that everybody could hear them. I would usually sidle up to somebody who looked like they might have questions and just ask if they had questions about the bears. And usually one person would say, "Oh, I have a question." And then once we started talking, once that one person asked a question, suddenly everybody would turn and everybody would have questions. If you watch the bear cams, if you know bear stories, you know stuff that will be of interest to people who visit Brooks Falls. There are lots of different kinds of rangers at Katmai National Park. There's law enforcement rangers, there are maintenance people, there are people there are not cooks for the national park, but there are people who cook for Brooks Lodge. I was an interpretive ranger, which meant that I answered people's questions about the park. Your job as an interpretive ranger is to connect people with the resource. You want to get people to care about the bears, because if they care about the bears, then they're going to care for the bears. Yes, John.
Do any of the rangers carry sidearms?
Do the rangers carry sidearms? I believe if the rangers carried sidearms, it would be law enforcement rangers. And to be honest, I can't remember whether they carried guns or not. I also don't know whether that varies per park or whether the answer would be, I don't know if that's a park system-wide question or a Katmai question. It's a good question. I don't know. Yes?
How bad were the swarms of biting?
Ha! I could not find the job description, but I do remember these. Remember, you're living in Bush, Alaska. If you, so the job description talks about swarms of biting insects. It talks about being outdoors with animals, including bears, and it also talks about dealing with people. Those were the three hardest parts of the job. That and living in Bush, Alaska. The swarms of biting insects were bad, especially in early July. It got better. I had some bites for the first few weeks that didn't go away. But that was not the hardest part of the job. I think that the hardest part of the job was this. So if you're a volunteer, you will spend 40 hours a week. If you're an interpretive ranger, I spent 40 hours a week on my feet. So if you're standing on the platform, you're standing on the platform. You're not sitting down. If you're in the gift shop, you're standing up a lot. So I'm somebody who spends 40 hours a week sitting behind my desk. I was stunned at the end of the first week at how much my feet hurt. Also, you'll do lots of walking. To get from where I lived to the Brooks Falls platform was a 1.2 mile walk. So I walked, I think, probably 4 to 8 miles every day. I lost a lot of weight. You will lose weight. You get to be outdoors every day. You get sunshine for 22 hours every day. It's a very physically demanding job. And I would say that if you're interested in doing this, I'm fortunate that I'm a hiker, because I feel like, being a hiker helped at least with some of the conditioning. I still wasn't as in shape at the beginning as I was at the end. So that to me was the hardest. My feet were harder than the bug bites. Also, it is a land with no cell phones. It is a land with very limited internet service. There is no television. There are no radios except for the park radios. You will not be able to post on Facebook. I think this is heaven. But be aware that if you need to be on Facebook every day, this will be a challenge for you. I want to talk about you as I provided transportation to king salmon. I gave the Park Service 40 hours a week on an assigned schedule. And the other thing you're responsible for is food. And I was telling Sumac earlier, that was the hardest part for me. I'm single, I eat out a lot, I don't do a lot of food preparation. I had an idea that I would do all these kind of freeze-dried hiker meals. You just add boiling water. I didn't plan enough ahead to make that happen. So I made a decision that I was going to live on, for 6 weeks, on oatmeal, peanut butter, tuna, granola bars, and Cliff bars. And I went to the lodge once or twice a week for the salad bar. The lodge has a really good salad bar. $17 all you can eat for lunch, $20 all you can eat for dinner. Totally worth it if you're not getting vegetables. But food is something to think about if you're going to volunteer at Katmai National Park, because you are in Bush, Alaska. And what I would say is plan better than I did. If I ever have an opportunity to go back, I will do the food differently. That's the thing that I learned the most. What do you get in return? They will transport you from King Salmon. The Park Service will provide transportation from King Salmon to Brooks Camp and back. You get to wear a uniform, which I thought was pretty darn cool. They give you lodging, and you get to be with bears for 24 hours a day. A note about the lodging. Park Service housing at Brooks Camp, there's a variety. You might wind up living in a cabin with one other person. You might wind up, as I did, in a shared living situation where you're in a bunk bed and you have multiple roommates. That was my situation. I loved it. I had a roommate, Carl, who worked in bear management. He's one of the rangers who keeps people and bears apart. He taught me so much. And I got to meet people who were coming in to give talks or do research, or people who were working for the Park Service. That for me was fantastic. And I'll give you a sense of my typical day. I woke up, I would wake up about 4:20 every morning. There was something that happened with the light around 4:20, and I would hear seagulls squawking when I woke up. And I liked to imagine that whenever I heard a seagull squawking, that a bear had caught a fish. And I don't think that's actually true, but that's what I told myself at 4:20. And I'm a morning person anyway, but it was early. And I would get up and I would walk to the bathroom, usually wearing my sweats. And then from the bathroom, I would walk down to the beach of Naknek Lake. And I would see something that looked like this. And usually I was the first person up in camp, so often there would be a bear sleeping. And I would try not to wake up that bear. And if I saw the bear, I would back up down the trail and go a different direction.
How cold is it?
4:20 in the morning, it was often in the 40s. Daytime temperatures, 50 to 70 degrees. Nighttime temperatures, I would say 40 to 50 degrees. I usually slept in a wool base layer and sweatpants. I'd enjoy the beach for a little bit. I'd go take a shower. And then by 6 o'clock every morning, I tried to walk 0.6 miles to the lower river platform, where I would sit often by myself, just watching the bears. And usually around 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe there was one bear fishing, maybe there was two bears fishing. Sometimes there were no bears fishing, but you could hear the birds calling. Birds would come and land on the platform. Often there'd be no bears, and then suddenly you'd hear a splash in the water over to the left, and a bear had appeared out of the woods and gone into the lake. That time for me was magical. Those mornings on the lower platform for me were the best parts of the day. There wasn't the drama of the falls, there weren't cubs going over the waterfall, but there also weren't crowds of people, and it was just me and the bears. Then I would go to work, either at the visitor center from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or at the falls platform from 10 to 6:15 p.m. Sometimes I would hang out at the falls platform after work. That time between 5 and 7 is a time where it tends not to be very crowded, so I'd sit and watch the bears. And then usually at night, every night they have a ranger talk from 8 a.m. to, starting at 8 p.m. I would try to go to the ranger talks, and the rangers would talk about different topics. And then I'd be asleep by 9:30, exhausted. I had always worried about what would I do if I had to get up in the middle of the night and pee, because I do in real life. I never had to do that at Brooks Camp, never. And I think it's just because I was so tired. Also because I stopped drinking Coke. I was too cheap to pay to ship Coke to Alaska, so I gave up my caffeine while I was there, which was not a bad thing. I slept better at Brooks Camp than I ever have in my life. So those were my normal days. People say, what did you do when you weren't working? I did the same thing that I did when I was working, which was watch bears and talk to people about bears. There are rangers who fished. I don't know how to fish. There are rangers who paddled. You can take a canoe or a kayak. I don't paddle. I did hike on my days off. There's one hike that I did up Dumpling Mountain. It's 1.5 miles long, 1,000-foot elevation. You get great views of the river below, and you can actually see the bears fishing in the river. There was one day I was up there by myself, and I looked down, and I know I saw bear 503 fishing in the river. Yeah. I'm going to skip this section because I want to introduce you quickly to some bears, and then we'll do some questions. This is bear 480 Otis. Bear 480 Otis is the oldest male bear known to frequent Brooks Camp. He is probably at least 22 or 23 years old. Most males at Brooks Camp live to be 15, maybe 20. So I always say that Otis has lived a lifetime and a half already.
How do you know when they die? How do they know they just stop coming around?
So the question is, how do you know when they die? I'm going to get to that in just a second. Otis is never going to die. If you look closely at Otis, this is what you see. Gums. Otis is missing this tooth and this tooth, which makes it really hard to bite the head off a salmon. But Otis has been around for a while, and he's a very smart bear. And if you watch him fish, what you'll see is that he's very versatile. He's developed a very adaptable fishing style. One of the things that he does, when he's feeling like he can't bite the head off a salmon, is that he'll pull up in the river behind bear 503. This is bear 503 in the jacuzzi. Otis, if he sees bear 856 or 747 in the jacuzzi, he's going to stay away from them because they're more dominant than him. But when he sees bear 503 in the jacuzzi, he knows that he can park himself downstream from bear 503, and bear 503 will high grade a few salmon, and 480 Otis sits downstream and eats what 503 doesn't. Some people find this sad, that a noble bear like 480 Otis is eating 503 scraps. I think Otis is a really smart bear. He's letting the young whippersnapper do all the work while he gets all the calories. Here's bear 503 cub adult. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why is bear 503 cub adult, a 5.5-year-old bear, why is he fishing in the jacuzzi? That's where all the big bears fish. This bear has a remarkable life. Remember those bears who went over the waterfall in 2013? This bear, 503 cub adult, was in that litter. And when he was 1.5 years old, his mom, bear 402, was being courted by bear 856, the most dominant bear at the falls. That bear separated bear 402, I should say. By that time, poor bear 402 was down to a litter of 1. Bear 402 had lost 2 of her 3 cubs, come back the second year with 1 cub, and then she was separated from that cub because a male bear was courting her. She went into estrus, she mated, the cub was on his own at 1.5 years. That's not supposed to happen. Cubs in Katmai stay with their moms until they're 2.5 years old. So this cub is 1.5 years old, never caught a fish. He's wandering around the lower river by himself. This goes on for 3 weeks. He's getting thinner and thinner. And the rangers are in the chat, and they're preparing us for the worst. It's not looking good, they say. But in August, all the bears go away. They follow the salmon upstream. And in August, we received word from a chatter that she had gone to a place about 10 miles away, and she had seen bear 435 Holly with 2 cubs, one a spring cub, 6 months old, and one a bigger cub, a yearling cub. And so what happened was that Bear 503 cub adult, alone by himself at age 1.5, was adopted by Bear 435 Holly. So he joined a family with a mom and a younger sibling. He got an extra year. He had 2 moms with very different personalities. He had an extra year of mothering, and he is now at age 5.5 fishing the jacuzzi, which is the best spot to fish. Being cute. He, I think, is going to be the king of the falls one day.
Are they tagged? Is that?
Thank you for asking that. They're not tagged. They don't wear collars. They don't wear tags. And I think that the reasoning behind that is that we want you to see bears as they exist in the wild, and they're not in the wild if they're wearing, you know, if you're wearing a radio, that's not like a natural thing. You can ID, but if a bear is seen, if an adult bear or a subadult bear is seen a certain number of times within a certain period by the official bear monitoring ranger, that bear is given a number. And you can tell them partly by the way that they look, but also by the way that they behave. Their looks change a lot. Come to my talk on November 13th. Because their looks change a lot between spring and summer. But their behaviors tend to be the same. This is Bear 128 Grazer. She's the big one on the right. This is 3 years ago, I think. She came. 128 Grazer is a young adult female bear. She didn't have a lot of credibility. People used to call her Crazy Grazy. Because she's got these huge ears that look like pom-poms, and she was really bouncy. You could always tell when she showed up, because she'd kind of come in and she'd bounce in and she'd splash around. 3 years ago, she showed up with 3 cubs, and she became the fiercest, most protective mother. And she would take on any bear who even looked at her cubs funny.
Her cubs look like they're different sizes.
Her cubs are different sizes, and that's one thing I want to point out. We have a large light-colored cub, darker medium-colored cub, and a teeny tiny, very blonde cub. And so we would see these bears on the cams quite often, and people always worried about that little cub, because that little cub is much smaller than the 2 bigger ones. That little cub was the fiercest of all 3 cubs. Bears are promiscuous. They will mate with multiple partners during mating season. It's possible that her cubs have different dads. It's also just possible that they look different.
So bears just get to get fat and sleep around.
Exactly. It's a good life. This is Bear 451. She is, I think, a 14-year-old female. The first time I saw her was several years ago. Going back before I even saw her on the cam, she had been seen in Brooks Camp just as a regular bear. And then one year she showed up and she had a bad limp. She had a bad injury to her right leg, and she couldn't put her right rear leg all the way to the ground. When I started watching the cams, she showed up with her first litter of 3 cubs. And I have a very clear memory of watching them one night around 3 o'clock in the morning in golden light fishing in the lower river. About 2 months later, that was in August, she came back in October, and she didn't have 3 cubs anymore. She only had 2. And then we were watching the cams, and camp had closed. It was mid-October, so there were not people in camp, but the cams were still on. And she and her 2 cubs were coming up the road, and one of the cubs stumbled and fell, and that cub never got back up. And and this happened right at a corner where there's actually 2 cams. And for the next 3 days, people watched that cub die on cam. So Susan's question earlier was, what happens to bears when they die? And I think the answer is, it happens all the time, and we don't know. But in this case, we had the incredible privilege of watching that cub die, and watching the mom and the sibling respond to that cub's death.
Why did it die? What happened?
So what happened was, So this happened after camp was over, but the rangers obviously knew it was happening because they were watching it on the cams with the rest of us. So they were able to arrange to go in. So what happened was the cub is dying. We're all watching. They have us counting breaths. They use the opportunity to engage us by having us count the cub's breaths. And the mom and the surviving cub would stay with the dying cub. And they'd go off occasionally to pick up a fish in the river, but they never were very far away. And then when the cub stopped breathing, the mom and the surviving cub got up and they walked into the river to fish, and then they walked away. The rangers knew that this was coming, so they had arranged to have 2 rangers nearby. And when the mom and the surviving cub left the dead cub, these 2 Ranger Michael Saxton and somebody else came in to pick up the dead cub. And they sent the body out for an autopsy. And they later determined that cub had died from canine adenovirus. Interestingly, right after the rangers left with the cub's dead body, cam viewers spotted another unusual object out on the spit. It was a big brown object. Was it a bear? Was it a boat? Nobody knew. But that object did not move for several days, and other bears would approach the object and then run away. So the rangers came to believe that bear too was a dead bear. And in that case, they wanted to do the same thing to get in and find out what had killed that bear. And in that case, weather kept them from getting there right away. They were able to get in several days later and see that it was bear 868. He's a huge bear, so they were not able to take the whole body, but they took parts of the body and tissues and they sent that out for sampling. They were not able to conclusively determine what caused his death. Yes?
So the park department doesn't intervene or treat any injured?
Excellent question. The National Park Service will not intervene unless it's a human-caused injury. So there's a great video online of bear 451 Divot, who was spotted at Margot Creek a few years ago with a wolf snare around her neck. She had 2 cubs. She was spotted with 1 cub at Margot Creek, and Divot had a wolf snare around her neck. And in that case, since the wolf snare is a human-caused injury, the Park Service mounted an operation to remove the snare. And there's a great video online about how that was accomplished. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to say when the bear died those 3 days, it was fascinating because it was like never crying.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody stood vigil around the world. And we'd go to bed and we'd come back and we'd check in and count breaths, whatever.
It was amazing, and thank you for saying that. It was incredibly difficult, but I always felt like it was a huge privilege because this stuff, deaths happen all the time, but how often do we get to see it? We've seen moms with cubs, we've seen bears mate, we've seen bears play. We see bears play on the cams all the time, but to see a bear die, what an opportunity, and what great science came out of that. And if we didn't have the cams, we wouldn't have had that. So I want to close, and I apologize, oh my God, for going so long. I'm going to close with this video, which might look like just a bunch of bears fishing in the river. But I will tell you that here, this bear is 480 Otis. This bear, remember that little teeny tiny blonde cub that Grazer had? Peanut? That's her. Bear 451, whose cub died a few years ago, she came back this year. She came back last year with a litter of 3. This year, those 3 bears were yearlings. And they were spotted in camp and looking very panicked. They were very thin when they were spotted in camp, and nobody had seen them since late July. And this is them returning in September, I think. And so that's bear 451. You can see her right rear leg, which doesn't quite touch the ground, and her 3 yearling cubs from her next litter. So a lot of people might look at this and just see bears fishing in a river, but now I look at this, and this to me is a picture of resilience. Because every bear in this picture, every bear in this video has his or her own story. And every bear in this video has overcome something to get where they are now. And that's what I think about when I think about bears. I think about those individuals. So, with apologies for going so long, I just want to say, let me ask you now the questions that I asked you at the beginning. What do you think about when you think about bears? When you imagine a bear? Does anybody think about something different?
Personality.
Ah, thank you, Sam. They do have personality. And they have stories. And they have history. And I'll end with this. Oh, this is bear 402. Remember the mom with the 3 who went over the waterfall? So this year she came back with 4 cubs. Here they are. And I'll end with this quote. A problem for bears is not so much what we don't know, it's what we think we know that isn't true. Okay, thank you all. So I went long. I know some of you have to leave, and you totally should. You should also totally take a bathroom break. I want to invite anybody who wants to stay as long as you would like for questions. Leave whenever you need to. Yes?
Is that population of bears stable?
Great question. The question is this population of bears stable? My understanding is that this population right now is stable. That the population at Brooks Camp is stable. The salmon run for the last 2 years has been extraordinarily strong. So I think what we're seeing actually is a stable population of bears and a large number of young bears. Part of the reason that I try to talk in the beginning of this about Bristol Bay is that I believe that if anything were to happen in Bristol Bay to upset the salmon population, that is going to have an upstream effect on the bears at Brooks Camp. So if you care about 480 Otis and his missing teeth, you need to care about what's happening I think you need to care about what's happening in Bristol Bay and to the salmon in Bristol Bay. Because Otis is having a really good year this year, in part because there were record numbers of salmon leaving Bristol Bay. But I worry about what happens if that salmon population drops.
So the food source is what keeps them stable.
That's correct. Yeah. And I think that's, and the food source is affected by things like the salmon industry and global warming, right? But it's basically, I think their job is to get fat, so their lives depend on getting fat. Yeah. Other questions? Sherry?
Is their hibernation pattern affected by climate change in any way?
I don't know the answer to that question. The question is their hibernation pattern affected by climate change? I assume at some level it is, but I couldn't tell you how. Bears hibernate when the food runs out. There's a number of factors, including temperature, but my understanding is that a huge part of it is food. So once there's no more salmon, once there's no more berries, a bear will go into the den. I think I know that in places like California and the lower United States, there are places where bears aren't hibernating because food is constantly available. And I think part of that is climate change. I think part of it is also human behavior, right? That they're finding human garbage cans. Yeah. So maybe the answer to your question is that hibernation is definitely affected by a lot of things, including climate change, but also human-induced changes. Yes?
How are the cameras powered?
There's an extra, the question is how are the cameras powered, and I meant to read up on this before I got here. I hope you took my contact information, and I will email you. I believe it is amazing to me that they can get a signal out of there. I believe it is the case, the cameras are solar powered. So they work when there's sun, and they don't work when there's not sun. In some trick of magic, there's not enough internet at Brooks Camp to operate the cameras from Brooks Camp. So what they do is they send a signal up to something called a repeater at the top of Dumpling Mountain, which then sends a signal to king salmon. And then I think king salmon is kind of the heart of the operation. And then if you're a camera operator, what you do is you log into a portal that allows you to look at a feed of the signal that's coming out of the cams, and then you use that portal to move the cam. Not a good answer, but it's the best one I have.
Thank you.
Yes, Jamie.
When they die naturally, 15 or 22 or whatever, what's usually the cause of that?
So causes of death among bears. Let me say that being a cub is really hard. And if you're a cub in Katmai, the mortality rate right now is maybe 50% in the first year. So your first challenge as a bear is to get past your first year. Cubs can die from drowning. They can die from, if you break a leg and you can't get up again and get to food. That's how a cub could die. A cub could get separated from its mother. A cub could get killed by another bear. I'm not sure that that's the most common cause of death, and part of me regrets having talked about that earlier in the talk, because I think that's maybe more of an anomaly. But being a bear is really, really hard work, and being a cub, I think, is the hardest work of all. So you can die, as 451's cub did, from a virus, but you could also just die from lack of food. If you're a cub and your mom dies, that's not good. Drowning, broken leg, things like that. Yes? Oh, sorry?
And when they're older, how the natural death work?
I don't know. I suspect, how do older bears die? 868 died, maybe from the same thing that killed 451's cub. You could die in a fight with another bear. I assume you could drown. You could also break a leg. I worry about what happens if you can't eat anymore. Maybe you just never wake up after hibernation. I don't know. Part of it is that so much of this happens in places that we can't see, or that we don't see, because we're not, the cams allow us to be with bears more than we can in real life. And in a place like Katmai, you can be with cams more than you can in real life. But so much of what happens with bears happens beyond our view. I think there's probably a lot of stuff that we don't know. Somebody else?
I was just going to ask, are there other large animals in the park that prey on bears? Or?
There's other large animals in the park, but I don't think that they are predators for bears. So while I was there, I saw a moose, I saw a lynx, I saw porcupines. I think that the most dangerous animal for bears is humans. Wolves are not going to bother bears. I don't know if there's bobcats there. There's lynx, but I don't think the lynx prey on bears. I think like in the real world, probably we're the ones they have to worry about.
Wolves probably find sick old bears too.
Maybe sick old bears or cubs, injured cubs, yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Did you see Velcro this spring?
I honestly don't know. I think so the question is, did I see a bear called Velcro? I think so, but he's very hard for me to ID.
It's very hard for me too.
Yeah.
The other thing, 503 sense of play. Is he as crazy playful as we see on the cams?
503 is a very playful bear. So 503 is a really big bear. He's one of the biggest bears. He's one of the bigger bears there, and he hangs out with the big boys up at the falls. Kim points out that he's very unusual because he's a big bear who's hanging out with the dominant bears, but he loves to play fight. He'll play fight with other adults. He'll play fight with other cubs. Play fighting is a way that bears get to know each other. It's a way that they can build skills for the future. I think he's probably young enough that he still has that spirit, and we'll see what happens with him as he grows older. Other questions? Jen?
And I'm sorry if you said this earlier and I didn't catch it, but how many bears are there up there that are names numbered?
Oh, so that's a great question. Thank you for asking. 4.2 million acres, 2,400 bears in the park. In July, the Bear Monitor identified 50 individual bears that fished at Brooks River. Some of those bears are numbered. Some of those bears are ID'd. Some of them aren't. The bears that most frequently visit Brooks Falls are compiled in a free publication online at the Katmai National Park website. It's called The Bears of Brooks River. It is a 134-page e-document that has general information about the park, as well as 1 page per bear of photos and stories of their lives and ID traits. I don't know how many bears are in that book. Maybe 60 or 50 or 60 bears, but not every bear is in that book, only the ones that are most commonly seen. And that's a great way to learn the bears. Jerry.
What about this contest that I'm hearing? Park rangers are drumming up interest in bears by having people name which bear's the fattest?
So Jerry just asked about Fat Bear Week, which I hope you all saw last week on Facebook. This is an annual event that's held every October. It's been held every October for the last 5 years. The rangers take, I think it's 8 different bears, and they put them in brackets, like for the NCAA tournament. And I didn't talk about that here because I just didn't have enough time. But the point of Fat Bear Week is that these bears, and I don't think I mentioned this, bears, their job is to get fat. Katmai bears, over the course of the summer, between May and October, these bears will gain 50% of their body weight. 50%. So if a bear comes out of the den weighing 400 pounds, she's going to go into the den ideally weighing 600 pounds. If a male bear comes out, hi Rosie. If a male bear comes out of the den weighing 700 pounds, that bear will go into the den weighing 1,100 pounds. So to help people understand that, the rangers every October do Fat Bear Week, where they pit 2 different bears against each other in a bracketed contest. They show a June picture of the bear and an October picture of the bear and say which of these 2 bears has gained the most weight. The contest was won this year by bear 409 Beadnose. I do not have a picture of her being fat, but if you remember when I talked about how boring it was to watch the bear cams because nothing ever happens? That was bear 409 Beadnose, being thin and trying to catch fish. And if you saw the picture of her winning the contest, she has at least gained 50% of her body weight. Yes?
When fish aren't available,
What do bears eat when fish aren't available? And I can only answer the question for these bears, because I really, that's kind of what I know. These bears will come out of the den and in May, and they'll spend a month eating sedge grass, which is rich in protein and also very filling. And then once the salmon become available at the end of June, they'll start eating salmon. When berries become available in August, they'll go back up into the mountains to eat berries. They'll keep eating salmon. They'll follow the salmon upstream, and they'll go up into the mountains and eat berries. And then in September, what happens at Katmai is that this same river that runs through the park, the salmon swim upstream in July. All those salmon that have spawned in July and August, in September, all those salmon start floating down Brooks River, and they wind up back in Naknek Lake. So what happens, and this is another reason Katmai is extraordinary, is that you get to see big bears gathered at the falls in July, but in September all those bears come back and they will hang out in the lower river where they'll feed on the dead and dying salmon.
Can they survive without fish?
The question is, can they survive without fish? I think these bears survive right now because of fish. I can tell you that Katmai National Park was founded as a national monument 100 years ago this year, not because of the bears, but because of the volcanoes. And Katmai National Park is the site of the largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. And that was a 3-day eruption that dumped layers and layers and layers of volcanic ash into the area. And I know that there was so much ash that it severely depressed the salmon during those years, and that when that ash killed the salmon, there was also a large drop-off in the number of bears. They came back.
I didn't see any bald eagle. There must be
Oh,
salmon
there's
as well,
tons.
right?
Yeah, if we had 8 more hours, I'd show you bald eagles. Yeah, you can definitely see bald eagles on the
That would be a
cam.
main source of food for bald eagles, you think, or no?
The salmon scraps are good for the bald eagles. So the salmon scraps, the big bears eat the fish, the little bears eat the scraps. the eagles will eat the scraps that the little bears don't want, and then the gulls will take what's left. And then it decomposes into the soil and feeds the tree. It is 11:30. I feel like there are unanswered questions. I am happy to stick around and talk to anybody who wants to chat, but I know some of you need to leave. Thank you all for coming.